Every schoolteacher operates according to a theory or theories of learning and within the context of a philosophy of what education should be fundamentally about. The only difference is that sometimes these theories are very consciously held and operated upon by the teacher, perhaps carefully referenced to published theory in the field, while others are held and operated upon rather less consciously, with perhaps little or no reference to published theory. The central purpose of this first chapter is to consider some of the major published theories of learning and teaching practice that have emerged over the last 80 years or so, and to assess the extent to which these are supported by or lend support to central government policy as manifested, for example, in national curricula, b. teachers themselves, operating within the terms of their own privately and professionally held views and beliefs as to what constitutes a good education and what effective teaching and learning look like. Family and community play a significant role in the language development processes of the children and promote the mindset for higher education processes. The family is the primary caregiver of children, shaping and nourishing the thought processes. On the other hand, the communities are the first exposed environment of the companies. The families are responsible for shaping the competence of a child to speak in the mother tongue. The primary exposures of the children are also ensured to be the same language speaking so that strategic mental growth can be supported. In the case of bilingual language and education, the families have the role of motivating the child for new learning processes. Community acceptance also states the segment to which children can be engaged so that bilingual learning can be shaped. Baker, 2021. The development of a child's approach towards learning and the development of bilingual education is dependent on the scale to which the parents and the communities are influenced by a language. Since a bicycle has two wheels and binoculars are for two eyes, it would seem that bilingualism is simply about two languages. Likewise, multilingualism seems simply to be about two or more languages. While bilingualism and multilingualism are different, for the sake of brevity multilingualism will be combined under bilingualism where there is similarity, and distinctions will be made only as necessary. The aim of this chapter is to show that the ownership of two or more languages is not so simple as having two wheels on a bicycle. Is someone bilingual if they are fluent in one language but less than fluent in their other language? Is someone bilingual if they rarely or never use one of their languages? Is someone multilingual if they have memorized a handful of words and phrases in other languages? Such questions need addressing before other topics in this book can be discussed. The complementarity principle means the principle of use of different languages by bilingual people for different functions, which can be related to the fact that bilinguals generally acquire and use their languages for varied purposes involving different people, different circumstances or different contexts. Baker and Wainwright. 2021. In case of learning and teaching, complementarity principle emphasizes on a consistent developmental outcome for children with consideration of different contextual influences on their educational improvement and learning. In case of complementary teaching to students, this means deployment of an approach that carefully aligns positive inputs from different contexts as family, early childhood setting, home and school. Thus, teaching by applying complementarity principle means ensuring students' educational achievement depending on multiple contextual influences, instead of depending on any particular settings. In similar ways, this principle for learning means learners achieving educational efficiency through a holistic and integrated planning or approach where they can connect different learning contexts in meaningful way for ensuring successful learning. Kumaran, Hassabis and McClelland, 2016.
In September 2000, the Arts Council of England asked the NFER to summarize recent research and theory on creativity in early childhood. The work entailed a selective review of research and theory published between 1988 and 2000 and resulted in a briefing paper on the subject. 1. This article sets out to update the earlier paper and to identify some of the principles involved in helping young children to develop their creativity in early years settings. How has creativity been interpreted in educational policy? Creativity has recently been granted official recognition as one of the overarching aims of the curriculum in English schools. The curriculum should enable pupils to think creatively and critically, to solve problems and to make a difference for the better. It should give them the opportunity to become creative, innovative, enterprising and capable of leadership, to equip them for their future lives as workers and citizens. The foundation stage curriculum is aimed at early years settings, providing for children aged around 3 to 6 years. The curriculum is divided into 6 main areas of learning, one of which is creative development. According to the curriculum guidance for the foundation stage in 2000. In 2014, I migrated to England and began my teaching profession as a cover teacher for reception and KS1. About 5 years ago, I began teaching at a 5-form entry primary school in East London as a Year 2 teacher with my own classroom responsibilities. Last year, I took on the role as learning leader for Year 2 and therefore I am responsible for supporting the academic development and well-being of roughly 130 children and assisting colleagues to ensure teacher standards are met to a high degree. More recently, I have begun mentoring other developing teacher trainees on their journey within education. However, 5 years ago, at the beginning of my own journey as a Year 2 teacher, due to the restrictions from my school because of a requires improvement report from Ofsted, it began limiting teacher choice and shaped classroom practice prescriptively. At the time, the school's priorities were constantly shifting, grasping onto any strategy that might get the school collectively to a good standard. There was emphasis on a creative curriculum which was set out for us, however it barely scratched the surface because professional dialogue or development days never got to the root of the school's problem, nor did not dig deep enough for educators to understand the reasons behind the methods that were chosen to be implemented.
So the pace at which human minds have evolved over the last 500,000 years, and more recently, the last 200,000 years, has been so frighteningly rapid that the evolution of cognitive function and perception can only occur in a small number of genes. If one needed to adapt dozens of genes, changes in concert, in order to acquire the penetrating minds that we now have, which our ancestors 5,000 years ago didn't have, the evolution could not have taken place, it could not have occurred so quickly, and for that reason alone, one begins to really suspect that the genetic differences between people who lived 5,000 years ago is evidence that the difference between the cognitive functions and ours is not actually as large. Therefore, a rather small number of genes may be responsible for the powerful minds that humans have, which most of us now possess. But you can see from the relatively crooked and narrow streets of the city of Rome as they look from above today, you can see that again, the city grew in a fairly ad hoc way, as I mentioned. It wasn't planned all at once. It just grew up over time, beginning in the 8th century BC. Now this is interesting, because what we know about the Romans is when they were left to their own devices and they could build the city from scratch, they didn't let it grow in an ad hoc way. They structured it in a very methodical way. That was basically based on military strategy, military planning. The Romans, they couldn't have conquered the world without obviously having a masterful military enterprise. And everywhere they went on the various campaigns, their various military campaigns, they would build camps, and those camps were always laid out in a very geometric plan along a grid, usually square or rectangular. An essay is a chance to identify your read and learned. As a writer, you first need to collect many materials, then write an essay in 4 or 5 paragraphs, structures and quotes. If someone is searching for a book or article to read, he or she will decide from the very beginning whether this work is worth attention. If you want to wow your teacher, polish the introduction, especially the first couple of sentences. Add an essay hook, something interesting, funny, shocking, or intriguing to win the reader's attention. Build an emotional connection with your reader right from the start. A hook in the essay is a catchy sentence or paragraph in the impressive introduction which serves as an attention element and an important part. An excellent hook sentence is engaging and interesting. It is a perfect method to start an argumentative or persuasive essay. The hook for your essay often appears in the first sentence. The opening paragraph includes a thesis sentence. Some popular hook choices can include using an interesting quote, a little-known fact, famous last words, or a statistic.
In such an environment, warfare is no longer purely directed against the military potential of adversarial states. It is rather directed at infiltrating all areas of their societies and to threaten their existences. The comparatively easy access to weapons of mass destruction, in particular relatively and low-cost biological agents, is of key concern. Both government and non-governmental actors prefer to use force in a way that can be characterized as unconventional, or also as small wars. War waged according to conventions is an interstate phenomenon. The small war is the archetype of war, in which the protagonists acknowledge no rules and permanently try to violate what conventions do exist. The protagonists of the small war observe neither international standards nor arms control agreements. They make use of territories where they do not have to fear any sanctions because there is no functioning state to assume charge of such sanctions or because the state in question is too weak to impose such sanctions. This type of war does not provide for any warning time. It challenges not only the external security of the nation-states and international community, but also their internal safety. Disabled people were among the early adopters of personal computers. They were quick to appreciate that word processing programs and printers gave them freedom from dependence on others to read and write for them. Some of these disabled early adopters became very knowledgeable about what could be achieved and used their knowledge to become independent students at a high level. They also gained the confidence to ask that providers of education make adjustments so that disabled students could make better use of course software and the web, rather than just word processing. For some disability groups, information in electronic format, whether computer-based or web-based, can be more accessible than printed information. For example, people who have limited mobility or limited manual skills can find it difficult to obtain or hold printed material. Visually impaired people can find it difficult or impossible to read print, but both these groups can be enabled to use a computer and, therefore, access the information electronically. Online communication can enable disabled students to communicate with their peers on an equal basis. For example, a deaf student or a student with Asperger's syndrome may find it difficult to interact in a face-to-face tutorial, but may have less difficulty interacting when using a text conferencing system in which everyone types and reads text. In addition, people's disabilities are not necessarily visible in online communication systems, so disabled people do not have to declare the disability and are not perceived as being different.
We can't see it, but brains hum with electrical activity. Brain waves created by the coordinated firing of huge collections of nerve cells pinball around the brain. The waves can ricochet from the front of the brain to the back, or from deep structures all the way to the scalp and then back again. Called neuronal oscillations, these signals are known to accompany certain mental states. Quiet alpha waves ripple soothingly across the brains of meditating monks. Beta waves rise and fall during intense conversational turns. Fast gamma waves accompany sharp insights. Sluggish delta rhythms lull deep sleepers, while dreamers shift into slightly quicker theta rhythms. Researchers have long argued over whether these waves have purposes, and what those purposes might be. Some scientists see waves as inevitable but useless byproducts of the signals that really matter, messages sent by individual nerve cells. Waves are simply a consequence of collective neural behavior, and nothing more, that view holds. But a growing body of evidence suggests just the opposite. Instead of byproducts of important signals, brain waves are key to how the brain operates, routing information among far-flung brain regions that need to work together. Mitzel Miller is among the neuroscientists amassing evidence that waves are an essential part of how the brain operates.
One of the social issues faced by the state of Alaska is the lack of mental and emotional well-being of the Native Alaskans. It is very unfortunate that many of the Native Americans are living under poor conditions throughout the country. In the cases of Native Alaskans, even virtually entire villages are suffering from a lack of mental and emotional well-being, which includes continuing poor physical and mental health. Alcohol abuse, domestic violence, homicides, and suicides are frequent among them, which of course, lead to families falling apart. It is tragic to see that many children are abused and not educated properly. As a matter of fact, the children themselves are abusing alcohol and other chemicals, and the rate is increasing over the time. Since parents are suffering from mental illnesses and alcohol abuse, they can't take care of their children, so many children are being taken care of by others or simply neglected. Therefore, we can conclude that Alaskan natives are losing hold of their communities, cultural identities, and most importantly, their childhoods. So you can see how serious the issue is. Plus, rather than making a living for themselves, they are depending on public services and subsidies. They have lost control of and responsibility for their economy and governing institutions.
There comes a time in a desert ant's life when a piece of food is too large to ignore, but too heavy to lift, and the only way to get it home is to adopt a new style of walking. The long-legged and speedy Cataglyphis fortis normally covers ground with a three-legged stride that moves two legs forwards on one side, and one on the other. For the next step, the insect mirrors the move with its other three legs. But recordings of ants in the Tunisian desert reveal that when faced with oversized lumps of food 10 times their own weight, the forward, tripod, walking style is abandoned. Unable to lift the morsels in their mandibles, the ants drag the food backwards instead, moving all 6 legs independently. This is the first time we have seen this in any ants, said lead author Sarah Pfeffer at the University of Ulm in Germany. The ants' long legs already help keep their bodies away from the scorching desert floor and enable them to speed around at up to 60 centimeters per second. Think of Usain Bolt, who has very long legs compared to body size. The desert floor is also very hot, so the further away their bodies are from the surface, the better, said co-author Matthias Wittlinger. The ants have also evolved to function at body temperatures of 50 C in a desert where temperatures Most Americans take energy for granted. But, for many families, maintaining access to reliable and affordable energy is a persistent challenge and a significant material hardship. This is a problem, referred to as energy insecurity, and it affects millions of American households each year. We have found that energy insecurity is a growing and vexing problem among low-income households, and the COVID-19 pandemic has made this problem worse. Our analysis finds that there are disparities in rates of energy insecurity across various socio-demographic groups. Black and Hispanic households, for example, are significantly more likely to experience energy insecurity and face utility disconnection than white households. So too are households with young children, individuals that require electronic, medical devices, and those in dwellings with inefficient or poor conditions. Households that cannot pay for energy are unable to power electronic learning or medical devices, keep perishable, healthy food in the refrigerator, or maintain safe body temperatures. Under conditions of extreme heat or cold, people can suffer from mental and physical health consequences, including the possibility of death.